many employees of the CDC end up in industry. Case in point, Dr. Julie Gerberding, who was the director of the CDC from 2001 until 2008, took a very lucrative position as the head of the vaccine division in Merck in 2009. She, was given stock options in the millions for that particular position, and so she overnight became a millionaire. There have been other employees that have gone on to lucrative positions. There's actually a revolving door between the CDC and the vaccine industry. Dr. Thompson himself came from Merck. He worked at Merck before he worked at the CDC. Dr. Frank DiStefano, who is the current head of the Immunization Safety Office at the CDC, actually left the CDC, went into industry, and then came back to the CDC. And so, you have this incestuous relationship between the pharmaceutical industry and the CDC. So really the driver is money. It's just like everything else. The driver is the almighty dollar. And when you get a vaccination on the schedule, when an individual, which could be a CDC employee, gets a vaccination on the schedule, that opens up a market for that particular vaccine that's in the billions of dollars.
The CDC has a conflict of interest because they are looking after vaccine safety, but they're also promoting vaccines. So we have to take the ability for the CDC to be responsible for vaccine safety. We have to put that into an independent commission. The CDC cannot be trusted to look after vaccine safety issues because they have a conflict of interest where they are interested in pushing as many vaccines as they possibly can. Okay, so that's a big conflict of interest.
If viewers are not aware of this, people need to see the CDC, at least as it is today, as just a marketing branch of pharma. So their job, and you can even look at their mission statement, is to promote vaccines, right? And if we could just change their mission to promoting healthy children, right? Let's get healthy people, a healthy society, healthy children, and look at vaccines. Are they helping or not? And that's what hasn't been done.
In our democracy, you have a number of institutions that are there to protect little children from predatory corporations, and all of these have been neutralized here. You have the regulatory agency, the front line protector of public health, that has been captured by the agency to become a sock puppet to the industry that it's supposed to regulate. It's an arm of the pharmaceutical industry. CDC sells $4.6 billion worth of vaccines every year itself.
Wait,
it owns the patent.
CDC sells vaccines?
Yes, CDC sells vaccines. So CDC is regulating an industry that it's part of.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. just stated that the CDC sells vaccines and actually holds patents on vaccines. I wanted to verify this, so I did a patent search. Turns out that he's accurate. The CDC actually is listed as an assignee on over 50 patents related to vaccines, including flu, rotavirus, hepatitis A, HIV, anthrax, rabies, pneumococcal, meningococcal, and several other vaccines. Does this seem like a public health agency that's making independent vaccine recommendations? Or does it seem like an agency acting as a risk management group that influences public opinion?
I look at this movement and I don't know why we haven't taken to the streets with torches yet. I mean, this is manslaughter. I mean, and the carnage that has been laid on our society as a whole, not just because of thimerosal, not just because of the MMR vaccine, but because we're all part of this grand medical experiment that's called the vaccination schedule, that is understudied, that is only studied by the CDC in order to quell the masses. CDC is not there to tell the truth. They are a risk management organization, and they are there to basically produce studies that will sway the opinion towards what CDC wants the public to do, and that is to uptake all of the vaccines that they're recommending on the schedule.
One of the things that I found was the advisory committees. So advisory committees at the FDA, advisory committee at CDC, because there's a process to approve drugs, and my focus at this point was the vaccines, and so they go through these advisory committees first at the FDA for approval, and then at the CDC for recommendation, and there's something called FACA, Federal Advisory Committee Act, which, as you would imagine, says that, anybody on these advisory committees can't have undue conflict of interest, can't be employed.
Should be independent.
And it turns out it's just not the case. And at the FDA, the committee is VRBAC. That's an acronym. And there's one person who's considered the consumer rep. And all that means is that they're not employed by one of the major pharmaceutical companies specifically.
Really?
Yes, that's all
That's
that means. They're usually MDs or MD PhDs or nurses with PhDs, or they can be, somebody without an advanced degree, but commonly they are. And then the same thing is true for the ACIP committee, which is the CDC's committee on vaccines for recommendation. And they also, it turns out that the CDC on their website automatically grants a waiver for the conflict of interest for anybody on the ACIP committee, because they believe that they need experts on the committee.
So the conflict of interest rules don't apply to them?
They don't apply to them, even though they're specifically for them. They're for federal advisory committees. I mean, if a regulatory agency isn't, then that's what we're talking about, right? It's all about these federal regulatory agencies.
It makes no sense.
It makes no sense.
As we see in many other areas of life, we look at how money is controlling decisions as opposed to maybe what's good for the people.
Unfortunately, I think that's always the case. It manifests itself in many ways. So you go through the history of other types of environmental agents that caused harm. You go back to lead. Well, there was an industry behind lead that resisted the paint industry in the 20s and 30s. Fluoride is another one that really has not yet manifested itself. Asbestos. W.R. Grace fought, and the industry fought very aggressively to resist the idea that asbestos causes mesothelioma or other injuries. And tobacco is a primary example. That's all about money. It's all about industry protecting its interests, which is fine. The famous line in The Godfather, after all, we are not communists. And so industry is fine. It's fine for people to make money. I have no problem with that. When they cross the line is when it's known, or at least strongly suspected, that injury is occurring. And because of those vested interests, we cannot even explore it. And when you speak about vaccines, that's taboo. You can't hear it. You'll be shut down. Your research funding will be eliminated. If you come on as an expert more than a few times, they'll start criticizing you, so they undermine your ability to be an expert witness. Parents who speak about it, or newspaper articles, they get shut down. Columbia School of Journalism had an article showing how this occurred, and then they retracted it, saying there was no truth to the idea that vaccine causes injury. We know vaccine causes injury. The government acknowledges it. It's their policy. The issue is how often it occurs and how it manifests itself.
Conflicts of interest, apparently fueled by greed, are rampant at the CDC and other agencies. This is called regulatory capture, and it happens when special interests co-opt policymakers or political bodies, regulatory agencies in particular, to further their own ends. It's very commonplace, as we will see.
There's a dynamic that is well described and well documented, and that I encountered virtually every day of my professional life, which is called captive agency phenomenon. And that is the process by which agencies become captured by their own orthodoxies or by the industries that they're supposed to regulate. So they become sock puppets for the industry that they're supposed to regulate. And a lot of times they become even more radical in protecting those interests than the industry itself.
The EPA does consider aluminum a toxin, and there are limits according to the EPA. This is where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, right? So the EPA has all these limits on aluminum, on mercury, and of course those limits are exceeded just within the first vaccine given on the day one of life, the hepatitis B shot. So, we've got a lot of conflict. FDA is saying, NIH is saying it's gross, the EPA is saying there's toxic levels, and we've got toxic levels exceeding a daily dose in a newborn, in a shot. Way over. I mean, many times over, right? But I'm just trying to point out the absurdity of all of it. It's just, so it's I realized that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, and whether it's intentional or not. I think that there's a lot of scientists and a lot of doctors who believe what they're doing. They believe they're working for the good.